Colonel Sergei Volkov arrived at the Mission Control Complex at 4 in the morning on March 7, while the operators were still on shift and dozing over their consoles. He had been summoned by an urgent, unexplained telegram, which indicated either an orbital accident or a security breach. Volkov was a senior telemetry control analyst, responsible for verifying data coming from the Almaz 3 orbital station, which was orbiting at an altitude of 320 kilometers and performing military reconnaissance missions. The station was classified, its orbit was not published, and even within the ministry, only those directly involved with the program knew about it. The duty officer met Volkov at the entrance to the main hall and led him to an isolated communications room, where two representatives of the main intelligence directorate and shift supervisor Kravtsov were already present. Kravtsov looked exhausted, his eyes red, and his hands shaking as he handed Volkov a folder of printouts. Volkov opened the folder and saw photographs of Earth taken from the station. The images were clear and of standard quality, but the images in them didn't match any maps. The African coastline was shifted to the east, the Arabian Peninsula had a different shape, and a solid landmass was visible where the Mediterranean Sea should have been. Volkov looked up at Kravtsov and asked where the photographs came from. Kravtsov replied that they had been transmitted by Station Commander Major Leonov 2 hours earlier with the note "Immediate coordinate verification required." Volkov ordered the archival data from all previous orbits to be retrieved and the coordinates compared. The operators retrieved the recording tapes, loaded them into the decoders, and began checking. The coordinates matched. The station was exactly where it should have been, the orbit was stable, and there were no deviations. Volkov checked the camera calibration. The cameras were functioning properly, and no optical distortions were detected. He requested a repeat survey of the same area on the next orbit. Leonov acknowledged the command and, 40 minutes later, transmitted a new series of images. The images were repeated. The same coastline, the same displaced continents, the same surface structure that didn't exist on any world map. Volkov realized the situation was more than a technical error, and that any decision he made would be recorded and used against him if it proved incorrect. He decided not to report to the ministry until he received additional data and ordered Leonov to conduct a full cycle of imaging of the entire visible surface of the planet. This was a violation of protocol, as the station was on a mission to observe enemy military installations, but Volkov believed that without a complete picture, it was impossible to explain the anomaly. Leonov complied. 3 hours later, Volkov received 120 images covering the entire Earth. Not a single one matched known geography. Volkov locked the communications room and forbade the operators from leaving until the analysis was complete. He hung the images on the wall in chronological order and began comparing them with maps. Africa was wider and shorter. South America had shifted south. Australia was completely missing, replaced by an archipelago of small islands. Antarctica had open landmasses without ice cover. Volkov checked the coordinates of each image. All the data indicated that the station was photographing Earth from the correct orbit, but the images showed a different planet. He contacted Leonov and demanded a check of all onboard navigation systems. Leonov reported that the systems were functioning normally. the star tracker was recording the correct positions of the constellations, the gyroscopes showed no deviations, and communication with ground stations was stable. Volkov asked if the crew had seen anything unusual visually through the windows. Leonov paused, then replied that the planet looked the same as in the images. Volkov ordered the crew to remain in contact and not take any action without his permission. Leonov confirmed this, but there was a tension in his voice that Volkov could not ignore. The GRU representatives demanded an immediate report to the ministry. Volkov refused, citing the need to complete his analysis. One of the GRU officers, Lieutenant Colonel Zuyev, claimed that Volkov was exceeding his authority and that withholding information could be considered sabotage. Volkov responded that transmitting unverified data would create panic and lead to poor decisions at the command level. Zuyev left the room without closing the door behind him, and Volkov realized the time for an independent investigation was over. He returned to the console and requested data from Leonov on the atmospheric composition and background radiation. Leonov relayed the instrument readings. The atmospheric composition matched that of Earth, the background radiation was normal, and the planet's magnetic field was stable. Volkov asked Leonov to describe any differences the crew might notice visually. Leonov reported that the cloud cover had a different structure, cyclones were located in the wrong zones, and the night side of the planet showed clusters of lights in areas that would be oceans on known maps. Weather bias or deserts. Volkov wrote down all the data, realizing that it didn't explain the situation but only deepened the contradiction. An hour later, Major General Ustinov, Deputy Chief of the Main Directorate of Space Assets, entered the room. Volkov stood up, reported on the situation, and showed the images. Ustinov examined them silently, then ordered the filming to cease, the station to return to its primary program, and all materials to the archives under the classification of high importance. Volkov attempted to object, citing the need for further investigation, but Ustinov cut him off, declaring that the decision had been made at the ministerial level. Volkov realized that the anomaly had been concealed, and that any attempt to continue work would be considered insubordination. Volkov returned to his office and found that access to the consoles was blocked. The operators sat at blank screens, Kravtsov was absent, and 2 military counterintelligence officers were on duty at the door. Volkov demanded an explanation. One of the officers reported that the room was under the control of a special department and that Volkov should report for questioning within an hour. Volkov refused to leave the room, citing the need to maintain contact with the station. The officer didn't insist, but remained at the door, preventing Volkov from leaving. Volkov went around to the operators, checking who still had access to the archived data. One of the junior technicians, Sergeant Mukin, reported that he had a copy of the telemetry on a backup tape, which he hadn't managed to transfer to the archive. Volkov ordered Mukin to retrieve the recording and restore the data from the last day. Mukin loaded the tape, and orbital parameter graphs appeared on the screen. Volkov noticed an anomaly. At the moment Leonov transmitted the first images of the altered Earth, the orbital altitude briefly dropped by 200 meters, then returned to normal. The drop lasted 3 minutes, but none of the sensors recorded any deceleration or change in velocity. The station moved to a different altitude instantly, without a transition, which is physically impossible. Volkov asked Mukin to double-check the data. Mukin confirmed the readings. Volkov realized that the station wasn't simply photographing a different Earth, it was in a different orbit, in a coordinate system that didn't match the original one. He tried to contact Leonov, but the communication channel was disconnected. Volkov turned to the officer at the door and demanded that the connection be restored. The officer replied that the connection had been interrupted by order of General Ustinov and would be restored after the internal review was completed. Volkov left the hall, passed security, and headed to the archives. He knew that if the anomaly was known and being concealed, there must be previous cases. The archives were located in the complex's underground level. Access was restricted, but Volkov had a high-level security pass. He went down, presented his documents to the duty archivist, and requested files on the Almaz program for the past 5 years. The archivist produced 3 folders. Volkov opened the first folder and saw a report from 1979. The Almaz 2 station crew reported visually observing a discrepancy between the coastlines and cartographic data. The crew commander, Lieutenant Colonel Savelyev, requested permission to conduct additional surveys. Permission was denied. A week later, Savelyev reported a recurrence of the anomaly. The station was deorbited early, the crew evacuated, and the program was suspended for a year. The Commission's conclusion stated, "The cause of the anomaly has not been determined. It is recommended to avoid surveying at the specified coordinates." Volkov opened the second folder. 1981, Almaz 3 Station, First Crew. Commander Major Grigoriev reported observing altered geography of the planet. Surveys were completed, and the data was transmitted to Earth. A day later, communication with the station was lost. The station stopped responding to commands, telemetry showed normal parameters, but the crew did not contact. 3 days later, the station returned within range of ground tracking stations. Communications were restored. Grigoriev reported that the crew was in normal condition but had no recollection of the last 3 days. The flight log for that period was missing. The crew had been returned to Earth ahead of schedule, their records classified, and Grigoriev had been sent to a closed hospital for treatment. Volkov slammed the folder shut, realizing his crew was in the same situation and that he had just made a decision that would make the station's return impossible. Volkov emerged from the archives and found the building cordoned off. Military patrols stood at all exits, and vehicles with their engines running stood guard in the courtyard. Volkov walked into the control room and saw Ustinov sitting at the main console, talking on a secure line. Volkov approached without waiting to be invited. Ustinov hung up and looked at him with an expression that revealed neither surprise nor anger, only weariness. He said that contact with the station had been restored 10 minutes ago, and that Leonov had transmitted a message. The crew was observing Earth, which was continuing to change. Continents were shifting, oceans were redistributing, and the planet's structure was transforming in real time. Leonov requested permission for an emergency deorbit. Ustinov refused. Volkov demanded an explanation. Ustinov replied that there were no explanations, only facts. The station is in an orbit that periodically intersects with another version of reality, one in which Earth has a different development history. The intersections occur randomly, lasting from several minutes to several days, after which the station returns to its original space. Attempts to control the process have been unsuccessful. Attempts to evacuate the crew during the intersection resulted in loss of communication and the station's disappearance for up to a week. Ustinov said that the program exists not for space exploration, but to study this phenomenon, and that all crews were aware of the risks before the flight. Volkov asked if Leonov knew. Ustinov did not answer. Volkov turned, walked to the communications console, and opened a channel to the station. Leonov responded immediately. Volkov reported that the ministry refused to authorize the deorbit and that the crew must remain in orbit until the observation cycle was completed. Leonov paused, then said that flight engineer Koval was demanding immediate evacuation, refusing to obey commands, and attempting to access the descent module. Volkov ordered Koval isolated and observation continued. Leonov disconnected without confirming the order. Volkov turned to Ustinov and said the crew was losing control. Ustinov replied that this was expected and that previous crews had experienced the same thing. 20 minutes later, communication with the station was lost. Telemetry showed stable parameters, but the voice channel was unresponsive. Volkov requested visual observation via ground tracking stations. The tracking stations reported the station was in the predicted orbit, but the reflected signal showed distortion that did not match the known configuration of the object. Volkov ordered a command to activate the station's emergency beacon. The command departed, and no confirmation was received. The station disappeared from the tracking zone. Radars no longer detected it. Volkov stood in front of the console, staring at the blank screen, realizing that his decision to send Leonov on additional filming had set in motion a process that could now be stopped. Ustinov left the room without a word. The operators sat silently, their eyes downcast. Volkov was left alone. The station returned 4 days later. It appeared on radar suddenly, without a transition period, exactly in its original orbit. Communications were restored automatically. Leonov logged on and reported that the crew was alive, the life support systems were functioning, and supplies were normal. Volkov asked what had happened. Leonov replied that they were continuing to observe. The Earth was changing every few hours. Continents shifted, mountain ranges appeared and disappeared, civilization on the surface was changing, city lights shifted, road structures were transformed, and in some versions, the planet was uninhabited. Leonov said they had counted 18 different Earth configurations, and that Koval had committed suicide on the second day. The body is in the descent module. Volkov ordered preparations for a routine deorbit. Leonov confirmed this. The descent module separated from the station, entered the atmosphere, and landed at the designated point in the Kazakh steppe. A search party located the capsule 2 hours later. Leonov and the second crew member, Sokolov, were alive but unable to stand. They were taken to the hospital, where they were diagnosed with extreme exhaustion, despite ample food and water supplies on the station. Koval was found dead in a sealed bag. The cause of death was asphyxiation, the deliberate disconnection of the spacesuit's air supply. Volkov was suspended from his post a week later. The official reason given was a violation of communications protocol and abuse of authority. He was offered a transfer to a closed research institute as a consultant without access to operational information. Volkov refused and submitted his resignation. The resignation was approved with the wording "at his own request." Leonov and Sokolov were placed in a closed medical facility run by the Ministry of Defense, where they were kept under observation until 1991. After the collapse of the USSR, both were discharged, but Sokolov disappeared within a month, and Leonov committed suicide in 1995. There was no suicide note. The Almaz program was closed in 1983. The official reason given was the insufficient effectiveness of military observations from orbit compared to unmanned systems. All program materials were classified and transferred to the GRU archive. In 2014, some documents were declassified, but the sections concerning anomalous observations remained classified. The publicly available materials mention a series of technical failures in the navigation systems on Almaz stations, but provide no details. Volkov died in 2006 in Moscow. A notebook containing notes he kept after his dismissal was found in his apartment. The last entry, dated the day before his death, read, "Leonov was right. We did not observe other versions of Earth. We observed ours, but at different points in time. The station did not move in space. Moved along the time axis. What we call an orbit is not a circle around the planet. It is a spiral through its history. We were never where we thought we were." The notebook was seized by FSB agents and added to a closed file. In 2019, Roscosmos announced plans to resume manned orbital programs for military purposes. The coordinates and orbital parameters are not being published. Official representatives declined to comment on questions about the new program's connection to the Almaz project.